This really happened to me, and even now when I sit down to tell it, I can feel the weight of those years pressing on my chest. What I'm about to share is not some fiction, it's the dark blood-soaked truth of how my family turned against me. It started on a stormy night inside my own kitchen, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly above the table. My brother's son, me own nephew, lit a stack of legal papers across the scarred wood. I can still hear the sharp scrape of the folder. That was the moment I realized the people I had raised, fed, and trusted were plotting to steal everything I had built. Their betrayal wasn't just a matter of property. It was a knife in the back, sharpened by greed. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I wasn't always a man planning revenge at 76 years old. Once I was a husband, a father and a man content with the simple rewards of hard work, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And for decades I worked my knuckles raw at the steel mills before retiring to a small, worn-out farmhouse just outside the city. That farmhouse was all I had left after my wife passed. And in my old age, it became my anchor, a one constant in a life carved up by loss and years of grinding labor. When family began visiting, more often after Margaret's funeral, I thought they were checking in out of love. My nephew Tyler was the ringleader. He was slick with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He'd bring bottles of bourbon, talk about modern investments, and try to charm me with his plans for maximizing value. I wanted to believe he cared. I wanted to believe that maybe he saw me as more than the tired old man people forgot about. But soon enough things began to shift. Little comments about the land being too much work for me. Questions about whether I had a will. Whether I had thought about easing the burden on myself. At first, I brushed it off. I didn't want to admit that maybe my own blood could be circling me like wolves. Then came the papers, the ones Tyler shoved across my kitchen table that night. It's just a transfer of management rights, he said, with that smug grin of his. You won't even notice the difference, Uncle. Well, handle all the tough stuff. You can just relax. My hand shook as I slid the folder back toward him. I'm not signing a damn thing. I said, my voice rough with more anger than I had felt in years. Tyler just leaned back, smirked, and muttered, You'll come around. Sooner or later, you'll have no choice. That was the moment I felt the ground shift beneath me, the moment the quiet dignity of my old age turned into something darker. A war I never asked for, but one I damn well intended to win. And the first shot in that war. It came when I discovered what Tyler had already done behind my back. I didn't sleep that night. My mind ran in jagged loops, circling back to the folder Tyler had pushed across the table, the slickness of his smile, the confidence in his tone. He wasn't bluffing. That much I knew. A man doesn't smirk like that unless he already has the cards stacked in his favor. The next morning I brewed my coffee, black and bitter the way Margaret used to make it. I sat at the window overlooking the overgrown field, my bones aching. My mind heavy, I thought about my late wife's, laugh about the way she loved this place, the lilacs she planted by the porch, the oak tree where we buried our old dog. And I thought about Tyler walking in here like he owned it. Like everything I had built was nothing more than a stepping stone in his greedy little empire. Something inside me hardened. I decided I had to know what he'd already done. My nephew wasn't the kind of man who asked permission before he took. No, he was the type who assumed possession first and worried about consequences. Later, I drove into Pittsburgh that afternoon, the old Chevy rattling as I made my way to the Allegheny County Courthouse. It had been years since I'd stepped foot in that gray stone building, with its high ceilings echoing like a cathedral of law. I walked through the metal detectors, the security guards giving me the quick once-over, and headed straight for the Recorder of Deeds office. The clerk at the desk was a young woman with sharp eyes, her nails tapping against the keyboard. "How can I help you today, sir? I need to check if any property records have been filed under the name Thomas J. Hollis," I said, my voice steady, despite the churn in my gut. That was my name. The name of the man who had paid every damn mortgage installment, who had kept this land alive through sweat and sacrifice. She typed quickly, the clatter echoing in my ears like a countdown. After a moment, her brow furrowed. "Well, Mr. Hollis, it looks like there was a document filed 2 weeks ago. Transfer of beneficial interest." My heart sank. "Transfer to who?" She glanced at the screen, then back at me. "To a trust, sir, managed by a Tyler McGrath." For a moment, everything went red. My fists clenched so tight, my knuckles popped. Tyler hadn't just tried to trick me, had already forged the paperwork. My own nephew had stolen my land out from under me, using legal ink and courthouse signatures to gut me like a deer. I demanded copies every page. The clerk slid them across the counter, and as I read, my vision blurred with rage. The signatures, they were mine, but not mine. Perfect forgeries. Tyler had found someone to mimic my hand, and he'd filed the theft right under my nose. I staggered out of that courthouse feeling older than my years, yet burning hotter than I had since I was a young man. I walked through downtown Pittsburgh, past the storefronts, and traffic, barely seeing the world around me. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Family my own blood had declared war. By the time I reached my truck, I knew one thing with cold certainty. If Tyler thought he could cheat me out of my life's work, he was about to learn that age does not dull a man's resolve, it sharpens it. But I also knew I couldn't just go at him. Head on, Tyler was young, connected, smug, and slippery. He had money from his business ventures, and friends in all the wrong places. If I accused him outright, I looked like the senile old man shouting at shadows. No, if I wanted to win this war, I had to play it smart. I drove back to the farmhouse, the sun sinking over the horizon, and sat in Margaret's old armchair with a legal pad. I made a list. Confirm the extent of Tyler's theft. Gather proof of forgery. Identify his allies. Hit him where he doesn't expect. It wasn't much, but it was the start of something. The next step came the following week when I quietly hired a private investigator. His name was Frank Daly, an old cop turned gumshoe with a gravelly voice and a love for cigars that stank up his office near Liberty Avenue. "You're telling me your nephew forged your signature and filed property transfers?" he asked, leaning back in his creaky leather chair, smoke curling above his head. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," I said, "and I need proof. The kind of proof that'll hold up in court, or better yet, the kind that'll crush him before he ever sees a courtroom." Frank grinned, showing a gold tooth. "I like your style. Most people just want justice. You want justice and humiliation." "Damn right," I muttered. Over the next few weeks, Frank worked quietly. He dug into Tyler's business records, his contacts, his finances. On what he found chilled me even deeper. Tyler wasn't just after my farmhouse. He was neck-deep in debt, his investments a crumbling house of cards. He needed my land, not because he cared about it, but because he planned to flip it to some developer for quick cash. Worse yet, he wasn't working alone. His lawyer, a slick operator named Daniel Keene, had a reputation in Pittsburgh for making dirty problems disappear. Together, they were confident they'd steamroll me, but Frank uncovered something else. Something that gave me my first real weapon. The notary, who supposedly witnessed my signature on those forged documents. She wasn't even in the state the day they were filed. She'd been in Florida visiting her mother. We had plane tickets, receipts, time-stamped photos. That was the first crack in Tyler's armor. I remember sitting on my porch one evening, the air crisp with the smell of fall, when Frank handed me the file. "This is your ticket," he said. "But you've got to be careful. Tyler's arrogant, but he's not stupid. Hell fight back and hell fight dirty." I nodded, staring out at the fading sunlight. Then we fight dirty too, for the first time since Margaret's death. I felt alive again, not with joy, but with purpose. My nephew thought I was old, broken, easy to push aside. He thought my age was a weakness. But what he didn't realize was that 76 years of life had taught me patient strategy and the kind of cold endurance he couldn't even imagine. The game had begun, and I was ready to play. And the first move, making sure Tyler knew that I knew I didn't storm into Tyler's house with fists raised or call him out in public. That's what he expected. He wanted me to sputter, rage, and collapse like some cranky old fool. Instead, I gave him something far worse: silence. A week after Frank handed me the file, I invited Tyler over to the farmhouse. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch when his shiny black BMW pulled into the gravel driveway. He stepped out wearing one of his tailored suits. Sunglasses perched on his head, that same smug grin curling his lips. "Uncle Tom," he said, spreading his arms wide as if nothing was wrong. "You look good, strong. How's retirement treating you?" I studied him from the rocking chair, sipping on sweet tea. "Come sit," I said flatly. "We need to talk." He raised an eyebrow, but sauntered over his loafers, crunching against the porch boards. He sat opposite me, leaning back, like he owned the place. "I've been thinking," I began, keeping my tone calm. "You and we need to discuss the future of this land." His eyes lit up hungry. "Finally," he said, "I knew you'd come around." I let the silence drag before answering, staring into his eyes, unblinking. "You've made some moves without me. Bold moves." He froze for just a second, just long enough for me to see the flicker of nerves behind his confidence. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. "Uncle, you're imagining things. I wouldn't do anything without your blessing." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a growl, then explained how my signature ended up on county records while I was fishing with John Ritter that day. The blood drained from his face. He recovered quickly, forcing another laugh. But the crack was there. Mistakes happen. Paperwork gets messy. Maybe the notary screwed something up. I smiled coldly. Funny thing about that notary. She was in Florida with proof. So if it wasn't her and it wasn't me who signed those papers, Tyler, his jaw tightened. He didn't answer. He stood slowly, towering over him, despite my age. "Listen to me, boy. You think I'm old, weak, finished. But you just made the biggest mistake of your life. You should have killed me outright, because now I know. And I'll never stop until I burn everything you've built to ash." Tyler stood face flushing. He tried to laugh again, but it came out brittle. "You can't touch me. I've got lawyers, money, connections. You've got nothing but your memories and an old shack." I leaned close, my breath hot against his ear. "You'll find out soon enough what an old man with nothing left to lose can do." He stormed off the porch, slamming his car door so hard it rattled. The BMW's tires spit gravel as he sped off down the dirt road. I sank back into the rocking chair, my heart hammering, my hands trembling, but not from fear, from the thrill. The war had officially begun. The days that followed were a test of endurance. Tyler began playing his own game, one designed to break me down slowly. First, I started receiving letters from banks. I didn't even have accounts with loans taken out in my name, debts piling up as though I'd signed for them. Then came the calls. Collections. They said, "You're delinquent." I knew it was Tyler, using his lawyer buddy to weaponize bureaucracy against me. He wanted to paint me as senile, incompetent, drowning in confusion. He wanted me crushed under the weight of paperwork until I caved, but I fought back in silence. With Frank's help, I documented every forged loan, every false claim. We built a file thick enough to choke a horse. Meanwhile, I played the part of the frail, confused uncle. I let Tyler think his schemes were working. When he'd stopped by the farmhouse, I shuffled around slowly, asked him to repeat things, pretended to forget small details. "You doing okay?" Uncle he'd ask, mock concern dripping from his voice. "Oh, I'm fine, son," I'd reply, smiling weakly. "Just getting old, I guess." And every time I saw it, the glint of triumph in his eyes, he thought he was winning. What he didn't know was that while he smirked, I was sharpening knives behind the curtain. One evening, Frank called me with new intel. "You're gonna love this," he said. "Our boy Tyler has been bragging at the Duquesne Club, talking big about how he's about to flip a property outside the city for 7 figures. I frowned. My property, bingo. Has already got a developer lined up, meetings in 2 weeks. They think the land is practically his. I tightened my grip on the phone. Then that's when we cut his legs out from under him. Frank chuckled. "You've got a devilish streak, old man. I like it." For the next 2 weeks I prepared. I met quietly with a lawyer of my own, sharp young woman named Angela Russo, known in Pittsburgh for gutting opponents twice her size. When I laid out the evidence, her eyes glittered. "This isn't just forgery," she said. "This is fraud, conspiracy, and theft on a grand scale. If we time this right, we can bury him." "That's what I want," I said. "Not just to win. To bury him," Angela grinned. "Then let's bury him." The night before Tyler's big meeting. I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, staring at the stars. Margaret's voice came back to me in the breeze, soft and steady. "Don't let them take what's ours, Tom." I whispered back, "I won't." The next morning, Frank and I drove into Pittsburgh. The meeting was set at a swanky law office downtown, all glass and marble overlooking the Monongahela River. Tyler strutted in with his lawyer Keene, the developer in tow, looking like the king of the world. But when Angela and I walked in briefcase in hand, Tyler's face went pale. "Uncle," he stammered. "What are you?" Angela cut him off, slamming the briefcase onto the table. "Before you sign anything today, you might want to look at these." She laid out the evidence, the forged signatures, the absent notary, the fraudulent loans. Each page hit the table like a hammer blow. The developer's face went from intrigued to horrified. "Is this true?" the man demanded, glaring at Tyler. Tyler sputtered sweat beading on his forehead. It's a mistake, miscommunication." Angela leaned forward, voice icy. "This isn't a mistake, this is fraud. If you sign with him, you'll be complicit. And when we take this to the you'll be dragged right down with him." The developer recoiled, snatching his briefcase. "I don't need this, deal's off." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Tyler's world crumbled in that instant. His lawyer, Keene, tried to salvage the meeting, but Angela had already filed the preliminary complaint. With the county, Tyler was trapped, cornered, exposed. And exiting across the table, calm as ever, simply smiled. "You wanted a war, boy," I said softly. Now you've got one. The look on his face was priceless. Fear, rage, and something else, desperation. That's when I knew this was far from over. Tyler wouldn't go down easy. He'd fight, claw, and bite his way through the flames. But that was fine by me, because I was ready to drag him through hell myself. When the developer walked out that day, I felt a weight lift off my chest, but I also knew we had only won a battle, not the war. Tyler had skin in the game and teeth. He didn't fold, he adapted. Within 48 hours, he changed tactics from cocksure to vicious. That was the real danger. People like him don't give up, they diversify their cruelty. It began with the small things, the kind of attacks meant to rot a man from the inside. My phone, when I could get a signal out here, started ringing with numbers I didn't recognize. Automated voices, harsh and clinical, telling me about summonses I'd never received and liens I'd never authorized. Post arrived addressed to me with bills for a truck I'd never owned and a credit card that had my middle name misspelled. Someone had opened accounts in my name and was funneling debt like smoke into my life. Then there were the calls from people who used to be friends. One old neighbor who'd known me since I was a boy stopped by the farmhouse and looked at me like I'd sprouted a second head. "Tom, you sure you're doing all right?" she asked, eyes flicking to the papers I'd left on the table. Rumors traveled faster than truth. Tyler's whisper campaign had started. Quiet, poisonous questions asked in bars, at church luncheons, and over the bridge at the mill. Isn't he confused lately? Have you noticed he left the stove on, the sort of small suggestions that plant larger doubts? The day the tires on Margaret's old Buick were slashed, I felt something in me tighten like a noose. That was no accident. Tire iron marks a broken porch. Light, a smear of black grease on the mailbox. Someone was working to make me look careless. Incapable, unfit to hold anything named after my family. Tyler wanted witnesses to my decline. He wanted the court of public opinion to declare me unfit before a judge ever had. Tom I called Frank and Angela, and we logged everything. Frank suggested we install cameras, and I agreed. The first night we left the farmhouse under surveillance, the footage was shaky, grainy shadows, but it showed a silhouette lingering near the porch at 3 a.m. Someone's small and quicker figure that moved like it knew the land. Tyler had his people. But the worst escalation came in the form of a man. It trusted Daniel Keener, the lawyer who'd fought for Tyler at every turn, started to file counterclaims. He made motions, demanded competency evaluations, and hired doctors to say I was vulnerable. Thinly veiled accusations of dementia floated through the legal filings they used friendly faces from clinics and padded reports to craft a paper trail that painted me as a hazard, a man unable to manage his own affairs. The goal was to get me declared incompetent, or at least to slow our momentum and drain our resources. That stung in a way the physical sabotage didn't. To have my mind questioned, my clarity reduced to a checkbox on some attorney's form, felt like a theft of something deeper than land. Margaret and I had built this place with work and stubbornness, not memory tests. I started sleeping with Angela's number under my pillow. She came to the farmhouse and sat at my kitchen table with a stack of court papers and a look like a woman who'd swallowed a pit of hornets. They'll try everything, she said, tapping the documents, character assassination, medical affidavits, delaying tactics. They want you exhausted and bankrupt. Her fingers were steady, her voice didn't waver. But they made one mistake. They gave us a timeline. They opened their mouths. That means they've made threats. They can't hide. That gave me a plan. We fought on two fronts. Angela handled the courtroom, subpoenaing records, deposing the notary from Florida, and flipping Tyler's financials inside out. Frank worked the streets, digging up the connections between Keene and the clinics that produced the bogus reports. I did the thing I'd always done best. I watched, I listened, and I remembered details other people dismissed. The tilt of a man's hat, the pattern of a neighbor's cigarette. As small things became maps. When Tyler realized legal maneuvers alone wouldn't win, he turned to intimidation. One week, a brick smashed the bay window in my living room. At dawn, the glass spiderwebbed and rained across my rug. The note folded inside the smashed vase read in blocky handwriting, "Stay out." The scrawl was juvenile, but the message was clear. He wanted me gone without blood, if possible. If not, then he wanted me afraid enough to walk away. I did not walk away. Instead, I started to play his game back at him, quietly and nastily. Not just courtroom strikes, but psychological ones. I began to invite certain people I knew. Tyler respected to the farmhouse's more inconspicuous gatherings, where it let slip stories about the notarization records, about the flights and receipts proving the notary was in Florida. I didn't press. I simply let the right gossip enter the right ears. Word moved. The developers, partners, reconsidered investors who'd been friendly suddenly backed away. Tyler's calendar of opportunities emptied like a bathtub, draining. Of course, that was predictable. What I hadn't expected was how badly he'd respond once the public noose tightened around his neck. The man who once grinned with the arrogance of youth began to show cracks, spiteful, unpredictable behaviors that made me more careful than ever. One afternoon, as autumn leaned into winter, I arrived at the farmhouse to find the shed doors pried open and the smell of diesel thick in the air. My workshop, Margaret's old Singer sewing machine, my father's toolbox, boxes of scrap metal I intended to turn into something useful had been overturned. Pages of Margaret's recipes lay soaked on the floor. And worst of all, the small wooden box where she kept our letters and photos lay open, its contents scattered like confetti. I knelt and gathered the photos with hands that shook, not from fear, but from fury. Someone had violated the last sacred inventory of our life. Frank came that night and he slammed his palm on the workbench. "They're getting reckless," he said. "This isn't just intimidation, they're trying to hurt." He stared at me with something like pity. "We can get police involved, we can get restraining orders." I wanted to tell him to do it. Part of me did, but another part of me steeled toward a darker satisfaction. Punishment tastes sweeter when delivered by your own hand, after all. So we tightened the net. Angela pushed for emergency motions to freeze the assets involved in Tyler's attempted flip. She served Keene with discovery, making the lawyer produce the records of payments to the clinics and the men who'd done the dirty work. Frank started tailing Tyler's lawyer and followed him to a strip mall office that advertised Elder Lauer nice euphemism for the kind of services Tyler was buying. Keene met with men who spoke in tones that suggested favors, not ethics. That's when I made a choice that still sits heavy in my chest. I decided to go to Tyler directly, now to see the man who would ruin me, and to let him know what a 76-year-old man could do when pushed. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized I wasn't just a nuisance to be bought off. I drove into the city on a raw morning. The wind biting my cheeks, Tyler's townhouse sat neat, with a potted fern on the stoop and a polished brass mail slot. He opened the door himself, hair a mess from the night before, face thinner than I'd ever seen it. You showing up unannounced now. He spat when he spotted me standing in his foyer jacket, covered in road dust. He closed the door slowly, as if to lock me inside the moment. You got some nerve, old man. I smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. You started this, I said. Am I only finishing it? He waved me into his living room with a motion that was half dismissive, half threat. The place smelled like cologne and takeout, the kind of manufactured comfort of someone who doesn't care for the smallties that mean real life. He sat, and I sat across from him at his cheap coffee table, and for a moment we circled each other like animals measuring distance. Listen, he said, voice sodden silk. We can make this go away. Sign a document. Give me managing interest again for a few years. I'll take care of everything. I swear to God. Uncle, just sign, and you won't have to worry. His hands shook. He was rattled, and I could see it, eating him alive. You wouldn't last 2 weeks on your own, I said. Counting the lies he told me like a ledger, you don't have the patience. He leaned forward, eyes hard. You think you can scare me? Put that file on me, and I'll bury you. Keen will. He stopped because his phone buzzed and he read the text, his face going. Pale problem. I asked, he swallowed its nothing. That was the lie. He was bleeding allies. He had meetings cancelled, phones not returned. The smugness bled out of him like water from a punctured can. In a last petulant attempt at power, he rose and stepped toward me. The need to dominate, to prove something to the world, burned behind his eyes. I had expected threats, maybe shoving. The look he gave me suggested he might reach for something worse. Get out, he hissed. Get off my property. I rose. You hit my house. Tyler, you tried to break me down and take what's mine. I'm asking you, one last time, to stop. My voice was low. The words tasted like gravel. Or I will make sure no one ever trusts you again. He laughed then, but it was a laugh that had lost hope. You think the world will care about your stories. Old man, he moved as if to close the distance between us, to bully me with his size and his anger. We were 3 steps from the door when I heard the distinct hollow click behind the living room sofa, the sound of a safety being taken off. My blood cooled faster than the autumn wind outside. The world condensed into that small metallic sound. For a heartbeat, I didn't breathe. Then I saw it, a dark glint at the edge of the couch. Not a fist, not a shove, but a shape with a barrel. Something in me that I thought dead. Since Margaret's funeral, some animal wisdom reacted by reflex. I lunged for the light switch at the far wall, tried to throw the room into chaos, to break the moment into so many parts the hand with the barrel wouldn't be able to aim. The bulb flared. The room erupted in bright, stupid light, and time snapped. Tyler's face was a mask of astonishment, and the man crouched behind the couch was not Tyler at all, but a stranger with a face I did not recognize. He'd been paid to make the final argument. He wore a jacket that had seen a dozen avenues of wrongness. The man looked up at me, eyes like cold stones. There was a long exhale in the room, the kind that separates living from not. My heart thudded against my ribs. For a second there was only the hiss of the heater and the distant hum of the city. Then the stranger smiled slow and patient. And that smile was a thing I knew could end an old life. I moved before he realized I'd decided. And as my chair scraped the floor, the muzzle rose. A shot cracked through the air. The shot split the living room into 2 halves. The before and the after, like someone had taken an axe to time itself. The sound was so loud and sudden that for a second all I could hear was a ringing in my ears and the blood rushing in my temples. Then the room turned into motion. Tyler diving the stranger behind the couch, scrambling the coffee table, tipping and sending an ashtray, and coasters clattering like falling teeth. I felt something hot and sudden at my shoulder, sharp, bright, a bloom of pain that made me taste metal. I'm not a man who remembers the exact shape of things in hospital light, but I remember very precisely the way pain drew a white line through my day. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd been hit. Clean through, I grabbed at the place, and my fingers came away, slick with blood. Tyler shrieked an animal sound and lunged toward the couch. But the stranger was already on his feet. He used the shadow of the sofa like a shield and dove for the door. Time moved too fast. I stumbled to stand, and the world tilted. Adrenaline did what it always does. It injected clarity. I moved without thinking, the old reflexes in my bones, taking command. I didn't go after the gunman. I couldn't. Instead, I ran to Tyler, grabbed the back of his jacket, and yanked him down to the floor. He hit the carpet with a loud profanity spilling from his mouth. "You son of a," he snarled, trying to push me off, but his strength was frayed. In the second that his head was down, the man's shoe heel scraped the parquet and the front door banged open. A figure in a dark hoodie sprinted down the stoop too, quick, too practiced. He bolted across the sidewalk and into the street. I saw him hesitate, one glance back like a hunted animal checking for pursuit. And then he vanished into a line of parked cars and a maze of alleys. For a moment, I had the absurd, ridiculous thought that it'd catch him, me 76, with a shoulder that felt like it was being gutted, but common sense was a luxury. We stopped affording in the heat of the moment. Tyler was on the floor, shaking, eyes wide and rimmed with red. For the first time in weeks, he looked truly broken. I reached for the phone on his coffee table with hands that didn't have the steadiness they used to dial 911. And I spoke in a voice that surprised even me, calm, measured, clear. Someone tried to kill me. I told the dispatcher, "There's been a shooting. Please hurry." Police came fast. The living room smelled like burned gunpowder and something else, fear. So first officers moved through like animals trained for a fight, their hands on holsters, eyes sweeping. They asked a lot of the same questions, who, why, where I answered as best I could. I told them Tyler had motives, that Keen's line of sabotage had been vicious, everything I'd learned and done. I watched anxiety flower on the faces of the men who had once sat across polished conference tables and called me irrelevant. The paramedics arrived, and a woman with quick hands and soft eyes laid my arm across a towel and peeled away my coat. The wound wasn't fatal. The bullet had grazed the shoulder, lodging in the muscle and tearing a path before coming to rest under the skin. The med tech said I was lucky, which is the sort of thing people say when they don't have the words for how tied to fate everything is. They wrapped my shoulder in bandages and fed me morphine that slid over the jagged edges. I could feel my pulse knocking at both temple and pride. The police asked more questions. Tyler sat on the couch with a blanket draped over his knees as if someone might take him for a child. He kept telling his story in disjointed fragments, denial, then bluster, then the sudden panicked plea that he'd been set up. "Uncle Tom, I didn't." He kept saying, voice too high. "I didn't know someone. This was not my doing." He looked toward the door like a man waiting for a verdict. I watched him with a cold academic interest. The man who had once tried to steal my life now begged me silently to save his ED, seen that smirk melt into supplication. Before, only then, it had been for favors, for loans. It is easy to be cruel when someone looks small and familiar. The officers took statements and seized Tyler's phone. They asked if I wanted to press charges. My mouth tasted of iron and something older. Satisfaction, maybe. Or the bitterness of knowing the world demands paperwork, even in the face of blood. I said, yes. Tyler's face crumpled. The look he gave me in that instant was not of hatred, but comprehension. He suddenly understood that the game had escalated to a place he couldn't control. When the ambulance wheeled me out, the foyer smelled like burnt coffee. Tyler stood at the doorway, hands in his pockets, and as I passed, he reached out with a hand that trembled and touched the sleeve of my jacket for a second, an awkward human thing. The barest apology. He did not meet my eyes. At Mercy Hospital, the ER thrummed with the clinical efficient noise of people repairing what the city had broken. Nurses murmured reassurances. I barely heard. The X-ray showed the bullet curled in soft tissue like a foreign thought. The doctor said they'd remove it in the morning after the swelling went down, that the wound would scar, but not be life-ending. When Angela arrived, she'd been at the courthouse then, to my farmhouse, then to Tyler's, and somehow to the ER she sat by my bed and made me laugh for the first time since Tyler's papers had first slid across the kitchen table. She had that look of a fighter who'd just climbed a cliff and found another one ahead. You're stubborn as sin, she said. Tracing a finger near the bandage like she could feel the war through latex. Has he been arrested? I asked. Not yet, she sighed. They want to talk to more witnesses. The guy who fired, no ID. It was professional Tom. They think he was hired. Keen's fingerprints were on the last wave of filings. We've got grounds. It was both relief and a fresh ache. Hiring someone to shoot a man is one thing. Having that man arrested and convicted is another legal machinery, moves at a pace that is polite and unfeeling. My life had one more battle line drawn across it. Later that evening, in the dimness of the hospital room, the police detective leaned in with the kind of patience that hides certainty. He told me that the shooter had been caught on a neighbor's Ring camera, that vehicles had been traced to a rental agency, and that a man matching the shooter's description was spotted on video near Payday Loan Storefront 2 miles away. We're working it, the detective said. Well, get you answers. Well, get you justice, but answers and justice are not the same thing. I'd learned that by watching legal papers drag their weight through county buildings and by feeling time turn to cement. I closed my eyes and I pictured Margaret's face soft with years and forgiveness. Pictured the farmhouse and the lilacs and the oak tree. I pictured all of it, stained by the idea that my family could be so hollow. The night in the hospital flickered, and I drifted into sleep, the kind that comes in little waves when the morphine does its careful work. I woke to Angela's shoe tap in the corridor, and the patient monitor's steady beep. She was standing with a small man in a cheap suit who smelled faintly of smoke and desperation. He carried a manila envelope. Who's that? I croaked, and the man opened the envelope and slid a single sheet of paper across the bedside tray. On it was a printout, a photograph grainy and small, of a studio apartment, the kind of place you forget until you need an address. The image zoomed in on the side of a cardboard box. With a shipping label, someone had marked the label with a red circle. Under the photo, typed in a mechanical font, were 3 words, payments to Keen Angela's jaw tightened. The small man, an investigator, Frank had sent from his contacts, someone who could make a clerk. Sweat said, we followed the shipping records. There are transfers small at first and then much larger, funneled through shell companies. The payments line up with dates you were receiving those forged loans and the clinics were producing reports. Keen's name pops up as a beneficiary more than once. A slow anger uncoiled in me, not the hot, immediate heat of a fresh wound, but the cold, omnivorous kind that eats through pretense. People who'd once sat in polite rooms and smiled for lunch and photographs had been laundering guilt through the hollow veins of commerce. Keen had been a lawyer on record, on paper. He had ethics behind the scenes. He had pockets for murderers and clinics that lied for cash. Why would he risk that? I whispered, because he thinks he's untouchable. The investigator said, because he thinks he's in control. Because he's built himself an ecosystem of favors and men who do nasty things for the right price. He slid another photograph from the envelope, a snapshot, taken on a Tuesday evening outside a strip mall, showing Keen entering the very clinic Frank had trailed him to. We've got payments. Tom, we've got corroboration. If we can tie Keen to the shooter, then the DA will have a case. I stared at that photo until the edges blurred. The man who'd once filed motions with a crisp pen had been willing to buy a life for the cost of a few transfers. That reality settled over me like a winter sky. Then take it to the DA. I said, take everything. Angela leaned over and patted the bandaged shoulder, as if she could transfer will into flesh. We will, she said, but you need to rest. Don't try to be the martyr. I watched the light in the hospital window dim, and the city breathe its evening rhythm below. The farmhouse, the oak tree, Margaret's lilacs. Those were the things that had driven me from the moment I'd first seen the forged paperwork. Now something larger loomed, a network of corrupt men who believed they could silence an old man with a bullet and a rental car as the morphine eased the edges of the night. I let a plan start to form in the slow hollow between pulses. The shooter had been hired. The payments led back to Keen. Tyler had lied, begged, schemed, and perhaps known more than he admitted. There were threads to pull, names to pull with them, and a rhythm of exposure that could unravel the whole rotten cloth. But before we could pull any of them cleanly, before the DA could pick up the threads, before the cameras could be subpoenaed, something else happened. A late-night call to Angela's office had come through while I slept. She answered on speaker, face tightening into a shape I didn't like. She hung up and turned to me. That was Frank, she said. He says go to the farmhouse. Now why? My mouth was dry. He found something. He says it changes everything. The air in the room felt colder. I imagined Frank's cigar smoke cutting angles through the dark as he moved. I had the clumsy, stubborn hope that whatever he'd found would be the thing that ended all of this. I had another smaller, fiercer hope that whatever it was would be the thing that destroyed them. I told Angela to call the detective and to meet us at the farmhouse with backup. I dressed clumsily, bandage chafing, and when they wheeled me out into the night, the world smelled of rain and the city's distant light. The drive home was a blur, streets and stoplights, and a steady ache that kept my teeth from clacking together. At the edge of the gravel drive, Frank was waiting. His face was a map of small lines and long decisions. He didn't smile. You ready? He asked. I gripped the handle of my cane like a weapon. Always. We walked up the porch together and pushed the kitchen door open. The farmhouse had been turned inside out. The moment we stepped into the farmhouse, I knew something wasn't right. The air was stale, heavier than it should have been, carrying the faint, sour smell of gasoline and dust. My boots crunched over shards of broken glass scattered across the kitchen floor. And when Frank flicked the light switch, the bulb above us buzzed, flickered, then held steady. The sight hollowed me out, Drawers yanked open, silverware scattered like bones, cabinets ripped from their hinges. My old oak dining table, upended, one leg snapped clean off. Margaret's china, the delicate porcelain she'd guarded through decades, lay, shattered in a pile of cruel white splinters. They hadn't just ransacked the place. They desecrated it. But the worst was in the living room. My photo albums were strewn across the carpet, pages torn, the plastic sleeves ripped apart, pictures of Margaret smiling in the garden of my daughters. Graduation of Christmas mornings filled with laughter, trampled, smeared with mud. In the corner, a jagged spray-painted message stained the wallpaper in dripping red. Old men don't last. I staggered back, grabbing the doorframe to steady myself. Frank, I rasped, my throat raw. He stepped past me, eyes scanning, a voice steady. This wasn't random. This was a warning. I shook my head, fury boiling through the shock. No, this was more than a warning. This was them saying, they own me inside and out, that they can walk into my home, tear my life apart, and I can't stop them. Frank crouched by the fireplace where something new caught his eye. A shoebox neatly placed on the hearth, out of place in all the chaos. He opened it, and inside were bundles of documents, receipts, bank statements, handwritten notes. Frank flipped through them, his brows knitting together tighter with every page. What the hell is this? I asked, stepping closer. Frank's face went pale. It's everything. Tom Payment's instructions, contacts, Keen's fingerprints are all over these, hellsome of them. Even list dates for the forgeries. He shoved a page into my hand. Look at this. The paper trembled as I held it. It was a ledger typed in neat columns. On one line, payment to J. Wilkes, notarization cover $1,500. On another, Tyler advance $10,000. And further down, a chilling entry, shooter retainer $25,000. I gripped the edge so hard my nails bent. They kept records. Frank nodded grimly. And someone wanted us to find them. I looked around the wrecked farmhouse, the desecration of every memory I had, and it hit me. The destruction was camouflage. Whoever had broken in didn't just want to scare me. They wanted to plant this evidence where it couldn't be ignored. Angela arrived 20 minutes later, storming into the kitchen with the detective in tow. When we showed them the shoebox, her eyes widened. This is enough to crack the whole thing open, she said. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. It's all here. The detective handled the documents with gloves, bagging them carefully. If this holds up in court, Keen's finished. And your nephew. He glanced at me. This ties him directly to the payments. There's no walking away from this. Mr. Hollis, for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope, raw and sharp. My nephew, his smug lawyer, their whole rotten network, they were unraveling. The noose had been tightening was finally beginning to cinch, but as we stood there in the ruined farmhouse, I caught Frank's expression. He wasn't smiling. He was staring at the shoebox like it was a snake coiled and waiting. What's wrong? I asked quietly. He hesitated, then said, This is too easy. These bastards are careful, meticulous. They wouldn't just leave a paper trail, this neat line around. Whoever planted this wanted us to find it, which means Angela finished for him, her voice low, which means there's another game being played. The thought chilled me. Yes, we had proof, but was it real proof or bait? Was someone higher up feeding us just enough rope to hang the small fish while they swam free? The detective bagged the last of the papers and promised to have his team analyze them. Angela pulled me aside, her voice hushed. We push forward with this, but we stay cautious. If it's a trap, we'll know soon enough. But either way, it's leverage, and right now, leverage is everything. I nodded, though. Unease gnawed at me. The farmhouse around us groaned with wind. through shattered windows, and for the first time in my life, my home felt foreign, like a stage someone else had built just to watch me crumble. The following days were a blur of police interviews, affidavits, and legal preparation. Angela worked around the clock building the case brick by brick. The shoebox documents gave us leverage in court, enough to request a freeze on Tyler's accounts and drag Keene into questioning. But Tyler didn't go quiet. The moment the freeze hit, he retaliated in the most venomous way possible through the press. A story broke in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Elderly man faces allegations of violence and delusion. They painted me as a paranoid recluse, dangerous, unfit to handle his affairs. They quoted anonymous sources describing me as confused and prone to angry outbursts. The article included a grainy photo of my bandaged shoulder taken outside the hospital, making me look frail and pitiful. My phone rang non-stop with reporters, each one sniffing for a quote, a stumble, a crack. It was Tyler's counterattack, and it landed like a punch to the gut. Neighbors who had once waved now crossed the street. Old friends stopped calling. Even the cashier at the local grocery store looked at me with that mix of pity and suspicion. Tyler hadn't just tried to ruin me legally. He was stripping me of dignity, smearing my name until there was nothing left. I sat in the farmhouse one night, staring at the headlines when Frank leaned against the doorframe, his voice gruff. They're bleeding you in public opinion, Tom. But don't forget, truth outlives rumors. We just need to land the final blow before they bury you in lies. I clench my fists, then we stop playing defense. We take the fight to them. Angela, sitting across the table, nodded slowly. If we time it right, we can subpoena Keene's accounts, present the shoebox evidence, and expose the payments. But we need something bigger, something that makes the jury see them for what they are, before they see you through Tyler's. Lies. Frank lit a cigar, the smoke curling like battle fog. Then we need a witness. Someone inside their circle who can't keep their mouth shut. We looked at each other, the three of us, and in that silence I felt it, the shift from defense to offense. No more waiting. No more being cornered. It was time to dig, to pry, to find the one loose stone in Tyler and Keene's wall, and pull it until the whole damn thing collapsed. The next morning, Frank delivered exactly that. He showed up at the farmhouse with a man I vaguely recognized from years back, a small-time hustler named Ricky Two Toes Malone, who'd done odd jobs around town and always seemed one step away from jail. Ricky looked jittery, eyes darting, fingers twitching, like he needed a cigarette he couldn't afford. "This is your guy," Frank said. "He's been running errands for Keene Cash, pickups, shady deliveries, has spooked, says he wants out." I narrowed my eyes, and why would he help us? Ricky swallowed hard, voice shaky, because Keene doesn't pay on time, and because I don't want to end up like the guy before me. "What guy?" I asked. Ricky glanced at Frank, then at Angela before whispering. "The shooter. They called him Ray. He didn't finish the job. Couple weeks later, he disappears. Word on the street is Keene had him cleaned up." The room went cold. Angela leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Do you have proof of this, Ricky?" Pulled a crumpled slip of paper from his pocket. "Dates, addresses, cash amounts. I kept notes, insurance. You know. Just in case." He handed it over with trembling fingers. "I don't want in on this anymore. I'll testify, but you gotta protect me." Angela's eyes lit up as she scanned the notes. "This ties directly to the payments in the shoebox. If this holds its corroboration, and if Ricky testifies," she looked at me, her expression fierce, "this could be the nail in their coffin." I studied Ricky, his fear raw and honest, He wasn't a saint, but he was exactly what we needed, a crack in their armor, a voice from inside. And as I sat there in the ruined farmhouse, the message still dripping red on the wall behind me, I realized something. This war wasn't just about land anymore. It wasn't about money or dignity or even blood. It was about justice, cold, unflinching justice that had to be delivered before these men buried more lives under their greed. And I swore then and there that I would see it through to the end. The farmhouse smelled of smoke and old plaster when Ricky finished talking, his hands trembling, as if the weight of his confession was too heavy to hold. Frank poured him a whiskey to settle his nerves, and Angela was already snapping photos of the notes he'd handed over. I sat back in Margaret's old chair, bandaged shoulder aching, and let the fury steady me. We had him. We had them. Tyler and Keene had built their empire on arrogance and fear, but Ricky's testimony would cut straight through the lies. It wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was blood and whispers, the stuff juries can't ignore. Angela laid it out like a general planning a siege. Well, get Ricky sworn in under protective order. His notes corroborate the shoebox records. That means a pattern of fraud, conspiracy, and witness tampering. If the DA sees this, they'll greenlight charges. Frank exhaled cigar smoke through his nose. Problem is, Keene won't go down easy. He's got judges in his pocket, cops who owe him favors. If he smells Ricky's name on the wind, Ricky won't last a week. Ricky paled, clutching his glass. I'm not dying for this, I leaned forward, fixing him with a stare sharper than any blade. You won't die, not if you stand tall and tell the truth. But if you run, if you slither back into the dark, Keene will find you, and then you'll wish you'd spoken. He swallowed, nodded. All right, I'll do it, but you promise me protection. Angela's voice softened. Well, make sure of it. The weeks that followed felt like moving through a minefield. Angela filed the motions to admit Ricky's testimony under seal, while Frank shadowed him like a hawk. Tyler, meanwhile, began to crack under the pressure. He stopped showing up to the Duquesne Club, started missing appointments, and word around town was that his big development deal had gone up in smoke. His allies began whispering that he was bad luck, and some even cut ties outright. Saw him once in passing outside a downtown cafe. He looked thinner, more haggard. His once slick hair was greasy, his hands twitchy. For the first time in my life, I pitied him, but only for a second. Then I remembered the bullet, the blood, the farmhouse gutted and defiled. Pity was a luxury I no longer afforded. Keene, however, was still dangerous. He moved like a man untouchable, showing up to court in his sharp suits, smirking as if every word spoken was just another line in his script. He fought every subpoena, delayed every motion, buried us in the paperwork. But when Ricky finally testified under oath, the cracks became fault lines. The courtroom was packed, the stale air thick with tension. Ricky sat in the witness box, sweat glistening on his forehead, voice quivering as he recounted the cash pickups, the whispered instructions, the payments tied to the forged loans. He described the night he delivered an envelope to Ray the shooter and the chilling silence that followed. When Ray disappeared, Angela guided him gently. Each question a scalpel, slicing through Keene's defenses. When she laid Ricky's notes beside the shoebox records, the jury leaned forward. Two sets of evidence, independent yet identical in detail. It was a blow Keene hadn't prepared for. Keene rose for cross-examination, voice dripping with venom. Mr. Malone, you're a career petty criminal, aren't you? You've been arrested for theft, for assault, for fraud. Why should this court believe you? Now, Ricky's hands shook, but he looked at me in the gallery, my steady gaze holding him upright. Because for once in my life, I don't want to lie. Because men like you and Tyler think you can use people like me and throw us away. And am tired of being thrown away. The room went silent. Keen's smirk faltered just for a heartbeat, and that was enough. After that day, the tide shifted. The DA moved fast, filing charges of fraud conspiracy, and attempted murder against Tyler and Keen. News outlets flipped overnight the same papers that had painted me as a delusional old man, now plastered headlines like local lawyer accused in murder-for-hire plot. Across their front pages, Tyler's mugshot hit the evening news, no slick suit, no smug grin, just a broken man staring blankly at the camera. When I saw it, I felt no joy, only justice cold and final. But the war wasn't over. Keen still had tricks up his sleeve, and Tyler still had desperation in his veins. From their cells, they filed appeals, pulled strings, whispered threats through lawyers. One night I found a bullet casing left on my porch, a silent reminder that their reach stretched even into steel bars. Frank tightened security around me, Angela pushed the cords harder, and Ricky was moved to protective custody. We were all soldiers now, bound not by blood, but by battle. Then came the day of sentencing. The courtroom buzzed like a hive packed with press neighbors and strangers who wanted to see justice land. Tyler sat slumped at the defense table. His eyes hollow, his once arrogant posture collapsed into defeat. Keen, still dressed sharp, tried to hold his composure, but sweat lined his brow. The judge read the charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, attempted murder, and the guilty verdicts fell one after another like hammer blows. When the sentence was handed down, 25 years for Keen, 20 for Tyler, the room exhaled as one gasps, murmurs the scribble of reporters. Pens I sat, still hands folded my heart. Steady, Tyler turned in his seat, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment I saw the boy it once known, the nephew who'd run through my fields, who'd eaten at my table, who'd called me Uncle Tom with laughter in his voice. That boy was long gone, swallowed by greed. His lips moved, barely audible. Why, I didn't answer. He knew why. Keen, on the other hand, glared at me with pure venom, as if promising that even in chains he'd find a way to reach me. I stared back, unflinching. Let him rot. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp Pittsburgh air. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but I kept moving, cane tapping the concrete like a drum beat. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. "It's done," he said. Angela smiled faintly. "You won, but I knew better. There are no real winners in wars like this. There is only survival." As we drove back to the farmhouse past the rivers and bridges that cut through the city, I thought about Margaret, about the life we'd built, about how close it had all come to being stolen. I thought about the blood spilled, the lies spun the cold, justice finally served, and I thought about the words sprayed across my wall. Old men don't last. They were wrong. Old men do last. We endure, we fight, and sometimes, just sometimes, we win. But I also knew one truth as the farmhouse came into view. Its windows bordered its walls, scarred. But still standing, the war had ended. But the scars would never fade, and that was justice enough. The farmhouse stood silent when I returned. Boards nailed over broken windows, red spray paint still faintly bleeding through the wallpaper. Despite Angela's insistence that we repaint, I told her, no, let it stay. Let the stain remind me what greed and betrayal look like when they try to hollow a man out. Tyler was gone now, swallowed by a concrete cell. Keen, too, stripped of his suits, and swagger left to rot, where law finally reached him. The papers called it a triumph of justice. Neighbors whispered about the old man who wouldn't break, and strangers sent me letters, thanking me for proving corruption could be fought. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, worn to the bone. The house creaked that night, as the wind pressed against the shutters. I sat at Margaret's old vanity, my bandaged shoulder stiff, and stared at the photograph of her, smiling on our wedding day. "It's over," I whispered, though I wasn't sure I believed it, because even when the courtroom doors had closed, even when the verdicts had been read, I still heard echoes of gunfire, of Tyler's voice cracking when he asked me why, of the hollow snap in Keen's eyes when he realized he wasn't untouchable anymore. Justice had come, yes, but so had something darker. A week after sentencing, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single playing card, the ace of spades. On the back, scrawled in jagged pen, were the words, "Debt never dies." I burned it in the fireplace, watching the edges curl into ash, but the message lingered like smoke in my lungs. Keen still had friends on the outside. Money buys loyalty, and loyalty buys silence, and sometimes revenge. Frank told me to arm myself, to keep my doors locked, and my eyes sharp. Angela said not to let paranoia eat me alive, but I knew better. You don't come this close to the edge without carrying the shadows with you. So, I prepared. I fixed the locks installed. Heavier. Bolts kept a shotgun by the door. Old habits returned, the habits of vigilance, of scanning the horizon, of waiting for footsteps in the dark. One evening as autumn bled into winter, I stood by the oak tree Margaret had loved. The last leaves clung stubbornly to its branches, and I thought about how many seasons that tree had seen, how it had stood through storms and summers and still held strong. Tyler had thought me too old, too weak, too fragile to fight back. He was wrong. Age doesn't soften resolve, it hardens it. Every wrinkle, every scar, every year lived becomes a weapon if you know how to wield it. And though it won in the eyes of the law, the real victory was something deeper. Tyler and Keen had underestimated me. They had tried to bury me in paperwork, in lies, in bullets. But I had endured. I had shown them and the world that an old man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous enemy of all. Sometimes at night I still hear Tyler's voice in the courtroom, that broken whisper, "Why?" And I remember my silence, because the answer isn't for him. It's for me. I fought back because the farmhouse wasn't just wood and nails. It was my life, my love, my legacy. Because Margaret's laughter still lingers in the lilacs by the porch, because justice, when taken cold and hard, is the only thing that can cleanse betrayal. I didn't answer him because he already knew. He had chosen greed over blood, arrogance over family power, over love, and for that he paid the price. The farmhouse is quiet again now, too quiet. Some nights, the kind of silence that lets you hear every creak of the boards, every sigh of the wind, every ghost of memory, walking the halls. But when I sit on the porch in the rocking chair, Kane resting by my side, and look out at the fields bathed in moonlight, I feel something Margaret once told me in the marrow of my bones. Old men don't last. No old men endure. And sometimes when the world least expects it, we deliver justice colder than death itself, the end.